There's a popular router out there with a vulnerability that's too old to be patched.
So, John, you have got a story for us today involving DLink routers.
Yeah, so we talk a lot about a lot of these embedded small home routers and things like that. And there is a recent report that came out, actually a vulnerability that the Fortiguard Labs has discovered in some older models of DLink routers. And these are mostly consumer grade products that a lot of people might have. So that's kind of I wanted to bring it up for a couple of reasons. But anyway, I'm just going to mention really quickly that the models affected are the DIR 655, the 866L, the 652, and the DHP 1565 models are impacted by that. So it's a remote code execution bug. It seems, from what I could see, to be very trivial, easy to exploit, probably very wormable. You could write something to just go scan the internet, find them, like we see a lot with things like Mirai and a lot of these other types of IoT-type botnets. It'd probably be very easy to add this into their repertoire in terms of exploits and recruiting into their botnets and whatnot. The interesting thing about this story is that DLink has decided, well, these are too old and we're not going to release patches for them, which is interesting for a couple of reasons. One is that a lot of people who buy these devices, especially consumers, put them on their network. They really don't think about them and they probably don't upgrade them. I could say that they're probably 5-6 years old, which is old, but I guarantee you there's people out there that probably still have these devices and aren't even thinking about whether they need to upgrade or change them out to get a better performing home router, because as long as it continues to work, that's all that most consumers care about. The other interesting thing about this is the FTC was saying that DLink was not responding to vulnerability reports on their products, and that they're misrepresenting the security of them,
right,
and that they have to go through some sort of security program for their routers on a regular basis by an independent assessor, not somebody from the FTC, but somebody that they choose but meets the requirements that DLink sets out. Anyway, it's a long, drawn-out thing. But in any event, DLink has agreed that they're going to go through these new security reporting processes and evaluations of their products before they get put out into the market and whatnot. So a little bit more stringent guidelines around what they put out. And the FTC has also required this of another vendor, ASUS, which is also, I don't remember if they're from Taiwan, they might be somewhere else, but who have similar issues. So it's interesting that they chose to not patch this. And I wonder how that all wraps in. They don't really describe how these two things tie in together, or whether they do or not, or if this is a measure because they're saying, well, it's so old, I don't want to have to deal with it in the new security compliance stuff that we have to do with FTC, so let me just get rid of it. I'm just not going to support it at all, or something like that. And they do have a 2-year grace period in between while this new security program is being rolled out in terms of auditing of their equipment and whatnot. So interesting. I guess the long and short of it is, if you have one of these devices, you probably should swap it out for a new one, because it's not going to be patched. They're not going to release a patch for it, so you probably want to get a newer piece of hardware just in case somebody does start trying to discover and recruit these into botnets and infect them and whatnot. So
yeah. So I mean, go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, I get to thinking about these D-Links and some other routers like that. People put those in, and they don't really ever plan to change them, right, until they break.
Right.
And they don't even think about them. And so it's like any kind of piece of hardware, equipment, whatever. There is a support life cycle that if you're outside of it, then you could be subject to something like this.
Like you said, this story has some back history, this whole DLink, and they're tied into this thing for, I think, 10 years, right? So for the next 10 years, they have to be under this, strict guidelines and
under the microscope.
Exactly. So, but I mean, when you look at it, I mean, I realize this story is pretty much coming out because of that history, and now they've got a product that has a vulnerability, and they're saying no. We're not gonna release the patch for this because it's outside of the, and as long as they met their criteria, which I think was that they had to let their customers know 60 days in advance, as long as they meet that criteria, they can basically say, look, I'm sorry, we told you 60 days in advance that this product was going end of life at this point, and end of life means we have to take it off our books. We're not supporting it anymore. We don't have the resources to go and fix code in those devices. So, from one perspective, it's like, I understand it. I get it, right? Your company, you make these devices, you get to a certain point and you're like, look, this has been out there for 5 or 6 years. Right. And realistically, 5 or 6 years in this world is a long time. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? 5 or 6 years.
In terms of technology.
Right. Yeah, that's a long time for a piece of technology to be out there that doesn't get, isn't completely obsolete in 5 or 6 years. So, so from that perspective, I get it. I get why, they made that decision and they're going to stick to it. And they're going to be like, no, I'm sorry, we're not releasing a patch. So unfortunately, if you have one of these devices, your best bet right now is to, go to your local Best Buy or Amazon and try to get yourself a new device.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess, I just kind of wonder if things are going to, if they're going to shorten product lifespans as a result of this in general, or other vendors might as well, just to kind of avoid having to deal with patching. Yeah. Even further than they might be, or tighter than they used to be.
Right.
This is a big, huge issue in terms of this landscape, the threat landscape on the internet of these embedded devices like these little home routers or network attached storage or these other types of things are ripe for getting scooped up into botnets, because little vulnerabilities get discovered. They have very low touch for the user, so the user's probably never, it's not like your Windows machine or your laptop that you would see lots of issues. You really have no visibility into what's going on the router and whether it needs to be patched, so they just let it be. As long as it works, they just let it be.
Yep.
Why would I touch it if it's working?
Right.
Exactly.
And that is the mindset of a lot of people. But there can be things going on behind the scenes that they don't know about, and maybe a lot of their issues that they're having are because the device got compromised.
It's a big story now, to talk about, hey, should the company still provide a patch when a known vulnerability has been found for a particular device that they're making, or because it's gone end of life, they're calling it sort of quits. It's, hey, we've said we're not supporting this thing after we've called it end of life. You need to now go find another device.